Food for Thought with Professor David Dete.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Welcome to another episode of Food for Thought with Professor Ndete. We want to kick off a series talking about some very interesting things. 3 terminologies, prejudice, discrimination, and stereotyping. Is there a connection between the 3? What do they even mean? How do they look like in everyday life? I am sure these are things we have seen or we have been a part of, but maybe we don't know that is what this thing is called. And so we want to look at them and how they affect how we look at each other and how we look at life. Professor Ndete, it's good to be in the office again.
Thank you very much, Pastor, and always welcome.
Asante sana. Prejudice, discrimination, stereotyping. Interesting terminologies. What do they mean, and is there a connection between the 3?
Yes, there is a lot of connection. And I'm glad that you chose this subject because it's very pertinent to what is happening in our country now. And when you asked me to talk about this, these are things I read a long time ago as a student, doing my bit of psychology. And I knew that it's a big problem. It happens everywhere. And unfortunately, most of the studies, well, not unfortunately, or fortunately, most of the studies were actually done in America. And so in my mind, these things are something to do with the Americans, simply because they are the ones who did most of the studies. But thinking about it, we are not very different.
Okay.
And it is these stereotypes and things that follow are so pervasive, they are so common, they affect us in so many ways. But because we do not pause to think, whether what I'm doing could be stereotypes, it could be prejudice, or it could be discriminative. We don't think about it very much in relation to our country, but I think it's a very common problem. Now, to put it in perspective, I think stereotypes comes first. And it is a term that was given to us or entered into literature mainly from France. And that was during the time of emerging textile industry.
Oh.
Okay, yeah. And so for you to be able to make a dress in a particular way, which I think still happens these days, you go and cut out a pattern.
Yes.
And you use that pattern to make clothes. It's like you have a stereotype, something that is kind of standard, and whatever you do must conform to that standard. So we are talking about 1600. This is when the term was introduced. Many people start talking about, and then it went into books. That if you want to produce a book and you want everything done in a particular way, then you have to have a stereotype, something that is you copy, and whatever you produce must be equivalent to that. I mean, it cannot deviate from that. And history has it, and we are talking to a Christian journal, so I throw in a few things here from the Bible, which will enable us to understand these things.
Yes.
When those times when they were trying to copy the Bible and make copies of the Bible, of course, hidden somewhere, the scribes were so meticulous in the way in which they copied it, word by word. And if, say, imagine you have a big, the so-called the Torah, the whole Bible. You copy it and it's huge. And then you make a little mistake. Then you discard the whole thing.
Wow.
And start copying it again. So the tendency to do things in a particular way has always been part of human behavior.
Yeah.
The way of seeing people in a particular way has always been part of human history. Go back to the Bible. Children of Israel, the Philistines, the Samaritans, and everybody, even among the children themselves, the children,
the different tribes,
all of them, the people who lived, foreigners who lived in, say, in Israel, Ethiopians and people from other countries. King David actually took them as foreigners and made them laborers. By definition, you are foreigners, so you have to do certain things like that. So it has been part of human history, going back to many years. But it was only recently when it was introduced what we call social psychology. Very recent, and actually in 1922, we are talking about 100 years ago. By a guy called Lippmann, 1922. And the reason why they introduced these things, started doing these things, doing this kind of research in America, is because of the historical background of the Americans. People who moved to America, they found the indigenous people there, and they started treating them in a particular way. The indigenous people started looking at the whites in a particular way, and then the slave trade came in. Then you have slavery, you have black people, you have whites, and then other people, you have Jews, you have immigrants from, say, from China, from wherever. And even up to date, I can tell you, people have recognized for a fact. I think this is where we start. There is a problem. They have recognized that there is a fact. It is a fact that different people are different, and there is nothing wrong with that. People are different. There is nothing wrong. Black people are black people. The way you are treated, if you are a Jew or you are an Indian or whatever, it's a fact. And you have your own cultural ways of doing things. And the other people have different cultural ways of doing things. So these are facts. I think let's assume, when we start talking about groups, there is something that's common and positive about that group. There is nothing wrong. There is nothing wrong with that. The problem is when you start discriminating against people, against those groups. You start discriminating them differently in a negative way because they belong to a different group. So we start with the stereotypes. Stereotyping, as I said, has been part of human history and human behavior. And it's not only in Kenya. You see, people live here and think that it's only people from outside, let's say Europe, they don't have stereotypes. I can tell you, I lived as a student in UK for about 3.5 years. Of course, I was really busy studying. I wasn't doing anything. But within a very short time, I realized that and this is a fact. I mean, I was in London, basically English. The English people always had very dirty jokes to talk about the Scottish.
They still do.
Well, it's been a while since.
I think they still do.
I think they still do. And more when I was so busy, I didn't have time to travel around. So when I had time after my studies, actually back and went, I realized when I went to Scotland, the Scottish people have nothing to do with the British people. They tell really dirty jokes about those guys. As a student in UK, whenever there was a problem, say during cold weather, like we have been having cold weather here, or they would say, well, it must be the Russians.
Why the Russians?
Well, good question. It must be the cold coming from Russia. They are pushing it towards us. We, as you probably know, the English and the French have never been the best friends for a long time, for historical reasons. And the English will tell you very dirty things about the French, and the French will say very dirty things about the English, and so on and so on.
Yeah.
When we were there, we happened to have a student in the hostel where I was working at that particular time studying. We happened to have a student who had come from Germany. And the things that I heard, he looks like a German. He must be terrible. He must be this. He must be this. And of course, these were memories of the Second World War.
Yeah.
And the guy actually happened to be a very, very nice person if you interacted with him. So basically what we are saying, they are part of human history. But the good thing is, things change and change for the better. And I still think there is a lot of hope for us in this country with these young people who don't mind about those things. And there are some very interesting studies that we have done in the US. I said stereotypes was introduced into social psychiatry in 1922 by a guy called Lippmann. And the people who study now studying stereotyping in a very systematic way. There's a famous study that was done at Princeton University in 1933. And what they did was that they took 100 first-year students, and these are young people, young people of this age, and they gave them, I think, 10 different tribes, people, racial blacks, English, white Americans, Hispanics, Chinese, and so on and so on. And they asked them to describe what they thought about those people. Those early studies showed that the people were really keen on seeing people in a slightly different way.
Yes.
The same study was repeated in 1953. Of course, not in those same students, but as the first years at Princeton University. And the results were very interesting in the sense that these young people did not rate people much on their differences, but on similarities.
Similarities, yes, yes.
It's like stereotypes were beginning to disappear. When they repeated that another 10 years later, in fact, the students were even very offended to be asked. To be asked whether there was a difference between, say, a black man and a white man. Yeah. In other words, with time, things change. And I think this is my prayer for this country, that things are going to change. So, stereotypes, when you put people, when you structure, in your mind, you have a schema on how people belonging to a particular people or a particular group behave. And how individuals from that particular group behave. And you act on those. In your mind, you develop an attitude
towards them.
Thank
you very much for being a part of Food for Thought with Professor Ndetei. I would encourage you, these conversations, we usually post them on our YouTube page. In case you're watching on Family TV, go to the Family TV YouTube page. You'll find all the episodes we've recorded with Professor Ndetei. We record an episode every week. We've been doing it for 2.5 years. So there's quite a lot you can get to know about where mental health issues are concerned. Forward them to your friends, tell them about it. And also, if there are any topics you would want us to discuss, feel free to text us on 20316 and suggest. Until next week, when we pick up from where we left off this week, have a good day.
Food for Thought with Professor David Detey.
Thank you for watching. Remember, subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can get notified whenever we upload new fresh content every day. Stay tuned and enjoy fresh, uplifting content.